Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to, depending on however you may look at your clock or wherever you may live, this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload, shall we? Really quick, I don't know if you guys heard me kind of flinch while I was recording the intro, but the channel's mascot, Tigger, decided to walk in and bite the side of my leg as I was recording it because apparently he just wants to be an attention hog all the time. And now, let's get into it. Today's first encounter, Anderson, Texas. 1978. My friends and I, along with one of their teenage sons, were in the area of the Neuse River deer hunting. It was the first week of deer season in 1978. We'd been there from Friday before, almost a whole week. It had been nice hunting weather, and I had 2 doe, 2 buck, and a 6-point and an 8-point. That was back when you could shoot 2 each. Anyway, about Thursday afternoon, it clouded up and started to sprinkle, but not too bad. We had no problem all week spotting deer and other animals, but we didn't see any on that day. So we went back to camp. We sat there and just talked and joked around. At about 7 that evening or so, we noticed we couldn't hear any birds or coyote or anything. It was just quiet. Now, all week long, there had been plenty of animals in the area, and now there were none. It was just plain eerie. Then we heard a strange noise. Now, don't laugh. Have you ever heard of someone try and talk like Donald Duck? Well, that's what it sounded like, only deeper, and then with some high-pitched whistles. We didn't know what it was and just dismissed it. Since we had been up early that morning, we all decided to turn in at about 8:30 or so. Now, 3 of us were in sleeping bags on the floor of the tent, and one of the guys had brought a cot, and were lying on it next to the tent wall. We'd been in bed for about 20 minutes when he sat up in the cot and said, "Something just brushed my head from outside of the tent." We just said, "Oh yeah, right," and laughed at him and lied back down. About 5 minutes later, he came up off that cot and yelled, "Hey, something just touched me." So we all put on our boots and walked outside of the tent. Now, we didn't see anything, but there was a smell in the air, like a cross between something dead and a really musky scent. Since we didn't see anything, we went back into the tent and went back to bed. After lying there a few minutes, I felt the need to go to the bathroom, so I pulled on my boots and grabbed my .44 Magnum handgun, just in case, and a flashlight. It wasn't a full moon, but it was bright enough to see where I was stepping, so I didn't turn on the flashlight. I walked about 20 yards behind the tent and was relieving myself on a tree when I noticed I could hear heavy breathing and felt like I was being watched. So I looked in the area where I could hear the breathing and slowly raised my flashlight and flipped it on. I nearly fell over. Standing not more than 5 to 6 feet from me was this huge hairy creature.
When I turned my light on it, it threw its hands up in front of its eyes, but it didn't run. It acted curious about what I was doing. It just stood there looking at me, and I at it for what seemed like forever. Then I got scared. I turned to look back at the tent and screamed for the others to come quick. And when I turned back to where the creature had been, it was gone, and I could hear it tearing through the woods. The others came running, thinking I was hurt or something, and they could hear it running through the woods as well, but they didn't see it. At that moment, I realized that I had wet down my leg. The others laughed at me and poked fun. I didn't sleep at all that night, just thinking, if that thing could come up on me that quiet, what's to stop it from coming into the tent? Or the fact that it was so close it could have grabbed me. Well, the next morning the rain started in harder, so we decided to go ahead and leave. I walked down to where I saw it and noticed that where it had been standing was about a 3-foot creek bed, and we had been eye to eye. I'm 5'9", so that thing must have been huge. As I looked, I could see where it had powered its way to the other side. To this day, I have not been back to that area. Today's second encounter is a Dogman encounter. My encounter occurred on February 2nd of 2016 at around 5, maybe to 8, in Pullman, Washington. I was living in Pullman working and completing graduate degrees at Washington State University. I know the exact date because I have a habit/hobby of writing bad poetry. And so when some phrase pops into my head that I want to write down, I jot it in the notes on my phone. That day I wrote, and this is true. I'm afraid to walk alone. I'll meet the devil on the road. Until writing this, I had honestly forgot about this strange detail of the story, which in retrospect is probably the least explainable aspect, as it implies the encounter was somehow more than coincidental. Pullman is a small college town that is extremely walkable. For anyone who may be hearing this familiar with the area, I commuted on foot daily from Lamont Street on Military Hill, down the walking/biking path, and up College Hill via Stadium Way, mostly to campus. So I would walk down the hill, through the valley on the bike path, and up the well-lit hill into college campus, taking about 45 minutes. Some other relevant details about Pullman are that it's extremely isolated, surrounded by rolling wheat fields, to an extreme degree of deforestation, solely populated by local townies and undergrads. The sun goes down famously early in any season but summer. Drunk undergrads are common, but very uncommon far from the city hall, where the encounter took place. It's not enough of a town to have a homeless population, and the drifters are few and far between. To the point, I walked home that evening in the dark, as I had hundreds of times. Upon reaching nearly the base of the street I lived on, where the bike path would have led up to a nearby road, Grand Ave, I saw the form of a humanoid crouched in the path ahead. While the road was somewhat lit, the bike path is down a small berm from the road and is very poorly lit in this spot. From about 60 feet out, I began to feel afraid, as I could not make out much from this form. About 30 to 40 feet from this crouched form, I stopped. I think if the figure was wearing clothing or had human skin of any shade, it would have caught more light. Instead, it looked too large to be a human, its back too curved, its head too far forward, and though I saw no evidence of fur, the context suggested to me very heavily that it was fur-covered. My inner dialogue ran through the options, and nothing made sense. If it was human, it's a very tall man crouched over, as if balling himself up on the road, back deeply arched over. If it wasn't, it was humanoid and something people do not generally believe exists. Those are really the only two options. I began to have the fight or flight response. I said, "Hey," at a moderate volume, something like 2 or 3 times. The form moved. It looked like it was turning its head toward me or away from me. I never saw eyes or any kind of light catch it. It just looked like a hunched over, crouched over humanoid in the middle of the bike path at night. Too large to be a person whose high school didn't try to get him to play basketball. And hey, maybe it was a drunk basketball player a half a mile from campus. Or maybe not. I was torn between the realization that I was potentially witnessing something fantastic and the will to live beyond that moment. The will to live, fear, I guess won. I immediately clambered up and embarked to the road, crossed the road, and walked the rest of the way home on the other side. The height difference, darkness, and existence of the berm kept me from seeing the form any further. I walked up the hill to my apartment, locked the door, and reflected on the bad poem line I had just jotted earlier. I wondered if I was being followed by some evil creature and would be further haunted. Nothing else happened, and it became a funny story I told friends in the town. I don't know if this story and its details might be useful to anyone, but I wanted to get them out there. It's a true story. It happened. I have no explanation for it. Even if it was a human, it's a strange coincidence with a note. Maybe most like scenario is a stressed out grad student hallucinating. I don't know. Today's third encounter, Montgomery County, Texas, 2007. I'm an outfitter from Central Texas, and I'm very familiar with known wildlife all over Texas. What I heard and found while deer hunting in Sam Houston National Forest was something I am not familiar with. I found 2 large tracks with a 5-foot step interval. They were clearly tracks, there's no mistaking about it. There were only 2 and some sand because the rest of the area was covered with leaves. The tracks were about 16 inches long. I know this because my boot is 13 inches long and the tracks were about 3 inches longer than my boots. I weigh over 300 pounds and the tracks were deeper than any of my boot prints. The toes and heels were really clear. The big toes on the tracks had a gap between them and the other 4. The heel on the track was narrower than the front part of the track. At about 5 that morning, in my ground blind, I started hearing a strange howl, off and on, about till 6 in the morning. Every time I heard it, it sounded like it had moved a little from the last spot. I wondered about it, but I didn't think too much about it until I found those weird tracks. I just don't know what else it could have been. I called the Forest Service, but the man who answered the phone didn't seem to take me very serious. He said they get reports about things like that, but he pretty much blew me off. That's why I didn't want to call them in the first place. I can see why people don't want to talk about what they have seen. People like the Forest Service should take these things serious and not blow it off. Today's fourth encounter, Polk County, Texas. Back in 1996, traveling from Pineland, Texas, we cut over to Highway 59 in order to go into downtown Houston to a gun show that was at the convention center that day. I'm not sure the exact location, but I know it was still far north of Houston on 59, probably in Lufkin and Cleveland somewhere. My ex-husband, stepson, 12 years old, and my baby boy, about 7 months at the time, were also in the car. All of a sudden, up ahead and to the right on the highway, a creature about 4 foot tall came running out of the wooded area, diagonally down the grassy slope, and ducked into a pipe under the road. Everyone in the car who could talk at the same time said, "What was that?" I quickly looked and noticed that the highway was divided in the middle by a grassy area, but on the other side of the northbound lanes was a pipe that came out by the other wooded area on the other side of the highway. My thoughts were that it used that pipe to travel back and forth. The creature ran completely upright on two legs, with dark brown hair flowing back in the wind as it ran very fast. The hair seemed to only be long in certain spots, maybe 4 to 5 inches or so. I couldn't tell any further details of its face because it was angled away from the car. I only know it was not human and was covered with brown fur or hair. Today's fifth encounter. It was at the end of my shift and I decided to take the trash out with me since I parked right beside the dumpster. I was walking toward the dumpster and I heard what sounded like a dog whining, so I looked around me. I didn't see anything, so as I walked to my car, I kept looking around to see if I could find a hurt pup. I unlocked my car and did another quick scan of my surroundings. When a car that was turning into the street illuminated the yard across the street from where I was, it was a quick glance, but long enough to freak me out. I saw crouching near a fence a giant half-man, half-dog creature. It just stared even after the car passed, but I could feel it watching me, and I just stared in that area I saw it at. My mind was not processing what I saw, and my danger senses were going off, but I was stuck in shock. Then something snapped me out of whatever trance I was in, and I jumped into the car and locked the doors. I sat there trying to tell myself that I saw what I saw, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't a humanoid dog, definitely wasn't a werewolf. I finally started my car and left. I had a long drive home, a very empty and dark highway, and I felt like I was being followed the entire way home. I got to my ex-boyfriend's mom's house, where I was staying at the time, ran inside because, as silly as this sounds, I felt like I was being watched. A few days go by, and I forgot about my encounter until I was closing again and decided not to take the trash out. That was a job for the morning crew. They could handle it. But as I locked the store and walked to my car, there on the hood were flowers picked from the ground, little Indian paintbrushes, and some other wildflowers. I was a little worried because I was afraid my ex was playing with me. We had broken up, but I still lived with his mom while he lived with some friends. He was a loser with no car, so he couldn't have put them there, but I also never thought he would beat me and cheat on me, and he did do that, so I couldn't be too sure. I took the flowers and got into the car and took my usual route home. The music was blaring, and as I was getting closer to the only streetlight that illuminated the crossroad, I saw this towering figure standing in the middle of the road. I stopped just short of the circle of light on the road. I was sitting in the dark, but in front of me, under the light, there was this huge, I could see its snout and claws, its extremely muscular legs. It was hairy, and it walked toward my car. I was scared. It reached out and put its long, overly exaggerated paw on the hood of my car and pressed down, causing the front end to buckle. I thought this was how I was going to die in an old, empty road late at night. Luckily, an 18-wheeler came over the hill and it ran off. Again, I got home and ran inside. A few weeks had passed and I put the encounter in the furthest part of my mind. I didn't want to think about it. My mind couldn't process if it was real or a dream, so I didn't think about it. Fast forward to a month later, I started talking to someone I met online, and we were meeting for the first time. I remembered that on the clothes I threw on my bed from the dryer, there was a skirt that I had bought, and I had the perfect shirt to wear with it, but when I got home, the skirt was not on my bed. I thought maybe my ex's mom hid it, but she had no idea what I was talking about, so I picked out a different outfit. The date went okay, but I really didn't talk to the guy after the date. He kind of ghosted me. I was kind of sad, but not surprised. That usually happens to me anyway, so I don't dwell on it. A few more weeks went by, and one morning, I heard our dog barking and freaking out. My ex's mom usually puts him outside before she goes to work, and I let him in when I get up. He was going crazy, so I went to check on him. He had wrapped his lead around a pole, so I went to untangle him. Nothing was in the yard, no animals, nothing, so I went back inside to use the bathroom. When I got back out to let him in, there was my skirt I lost a month before, sitting in the grass, damp from the morning dew. Smelled horrible and had tiny holes all through it. It wasn't there when I went outside before, but it was there now. I couldn't believe it. I sent pics to my ex's mom and told her I found my skirt. I don't know how it ended up outside with holes in it. It wasn't dirty, so there was no way the dog had buried it. But it did have a funky smell. I moved out shortly because living there I found out why my ex was so toxic. I sometimes feel like I'm being watched, but I'm not scared by it anymore. I look at it as a guardian or a protector. I don't know if it's all related, but I think it is. Today's sixth encounter, Trinity, Texas, 1998. While I was deer hunting in a box stand, I saw some movement to the south. I turned and looked and prepared to shoot. At first I thought it was a deer. It moved again and I realized its distance and size. It was further away and much larger than I first thought. Its size is why I thought it was close to me. But when it moved again and I saw it looking straight at it and not out of the corner of my eye is when I knew it was definitely not a deer. It reminded me of someone behind a 4x8 sheet of plywood standing on the end, walking from tree to tree. The size was about the same, though a little smaller, I think. I watched it for about an hour, and it stayed at 75 to 100 yards away from me the whole time. It walked from one tree to another, and sometimes I would lose it. It would pass through some small pine thickets. I couldn't judge its shape very well, due to the trees between me and it, but it was definitely walking upright. When it moved, it covered a lot of ground quickly, possibly from a long stride. Though it never seemed to be in a hurry, its movements also appeared to be well thought out and deliberate, as it moved from one semi-hiding place to another, like it was playing hide-and-seek. At some of the trees where it stopped, I could see on both sides of the tree. I think now how funny it was. Like a woolly mammoth hiding behind a toothpick, it basically half-circled me in this time and stayed about the same distance all the while. I wish I would have had a scope on my gun to get a better look at this guy. I don't know what it was that I saw, but it must have known I was there. I don't know if I was in its path of travel and it just went around me, or if it went around me out of curiosity. But it was very cautious of its distance and movement. It made no sounds, nor did it move any brush or limbs as it moved. I think it knew very well of what it was doing, but I don't think it knew that I could see it. After it had covered the half circle around me, it just disappeared. Also, in the same area, I used to find scrapes in the pine that were about 6 feet off the ground, and would be all the way around the tree. The trees would always be pines at about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, and about 15 feet high. The scraped area would be about 1 to 1.5 feet long, up and down the tree. I also seen this in Tyler County, much more.
And that, folks, was the early morning or middle of the night bonus upload. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives people a place to share their experiences, theories, and ideas judgment-free. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, friends. These creatures are real, they are out there and dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for truths. God bless.